All the Young Dudes. Sirius's Perspective by Roller Coaster Words. Chapter 96. 6th Year. September. Wednesday, the 1st of September, 1976. This is the year, lads. This is the year. It finally happens. 6 years of waiting and it all pays off. You can't be talking about what I think you're talking about, Remus said, raising a sceptical eyebrow over the top of the pages of his book. Oh, yes, James grinned manically. Lily Evans is definitely going to realise she's mad about me. I can feel it. Are you sure, though? Sirius drawled, glancing over his shoulder from where he sat at the window. You've had these feelings before. I have, James conceded solemnly. You're quite right, Prefect. But something's different this time. I can practically taste it. Love is very much in the air. Or lust? Remus returned to his book, muttering, You're probably just picking up on the raging hormones coming off these idiots. He jerked his chin towards Sirius and Peter, who were both pressed against the windows of their carriage, searching King's Cross for their girlfriends. Who are you calling an idiot, Moony? Sirius shot back. I can't help it if I drive a woman wild with desire. Sirius bloody Black, I could kill you! The train shook with the wrath of Mary MacDonald as she pounded down the corridor in her heeled boots, shrieking furiously. Remus nodded smugly. Wild was something, anyway. James, the traitor, almost choked on his Barty Bot's every-flavoured bean from laughing so hard. Sirius shot him a glare, but when James grinned back it was hard to remain annoyed. He'd been effusively happy ever since discovering that Sirius and Remus had reconciled, and although he was tactful enough not to mention it directly, it was obvious that he'd been counting down the days until they made up, almost as much as Sirius. And now that he no longer was caught in the no-man's land of tension between the two boys, James was practically bouncing off the walls with energy, making grand declarations about all that would be accomplished in the new school year, most of which had to do with Lily Evans. James was still trying to catch his breath when Mary barged into their carriage, eyes aflame. Her gaze locked onto Sirius, and he could have sworn that the temperature in the car went up by a few degrees. What have I done? He demanded. He was sure he hadn't had enough time to do anything to warrant his girlfriend's fury yet. The train hadn't even left the bloody station. You really don't know, do you? Mary shook her head in disgust, fuming. The gold hoops on her ears jingled with the motion. Diagonally? She stamped her foot. Sirius felt the blood drain from his face. Bugger. Fuck you, Black. She whirled around, slamming the door open just as the train began to move. Sirius scrambled to his feet, hurrying after her. Oi, Mary, wait, I'm sorry. He followed her into the corridor, stumbling a bit as he tried to grab her arm. Mary, hey, just hang on a minute. Where are you even... fuck's sake. The third year, that had just opened a door into his face, squeaked an apology and ducked back into her compartment, watching anxiously through the window as he stormed by. Mary continued to stomp down the corridor, with no apparent destination in sight. Sirius could feel the frustration knotting in his chest. Bloody hell, he shouted, catching up with her. Would you just calm down for a second? He wrapped his fingers around her wrist, tugging her to a stop. Mary spun, eyes flashing dangerously, and yanked her arm out of his grasp. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, she shouted right back, glaring furiously. I waited for 2 hours. 2 hours, Sirius. He winced. Look, I'm sorry, Mary cut him off with a sharp bark of laughter, folding her arms across her chest. Oh, this'll be brilliant. Go on then. She raised an eyebrow. Let's hear it. What's your excuse, Black, Sirius flushed, trying to tamp down the anger that wanted to creep up his throat, reminding himself that he was, unequivocally, at fault for this situation. He just wished that Mary didn't have to make such a scene about it. I don't exactly have an excuse, I just forgot, but... She threw her hands up, voice rising as she said, Well, that's absolutely delightful, isn't it? Just bloody forgot your girlfriend's birthday. You really have a unique way of showing how much you care, Sirius. There were students poking their heads out into the corridor now, trying to see what all the shouting was about. I do care. I didn't mean to forget, Mary. Well, of course you didn't mean to. You never bloody mean to. Would you let me finish a bloody sentence? No! She spun on her heel again, stomping off, and he followed, gritting his teeth. It took several more minutes of pursuit through the corridors before Mary shoved into an empty carriage, flinging herself down next to the window and pouting. Sirius collapsed across from her, letting his head fall back against the seat as he groaned. Merlin's sake, woman. You're going to be the death of me. She snorted, staring belligerently at the landscape blurring past outside. Sirius stretched his leg out, nudging her ankle with his foot. She scowled at him. Come on, MacDonald. I really didn't mean to. That's the problem, Sirius, she snapped. You treat me like an afterthought. I didn't agree to be your girlfriend just so that I could provide some sort of entertainment whenever your friends are busy. You're not. Mary, Mary, I care about you. Well, then act like it. Sirius frowned, taken aback at the outburst. He didn't think he treated Mary as an afterthought. In fact, he thought he spent quite a bit of time with her. He'd invited her to visit over the summer, hadn't he? Sure, James had been there, but it is his house. What did she expect? Mary continued to stare out at the window, refusing to look at him. Sirius watched her as a tense silence filled the car, dulled only by the rumble of the train around them. What was she getting at, bringing up his friends? He didn't see what they had anything to do with him forgetting her birthday. He just had other things on his mind. And besides, he was capable of caring about more than one person. The Marauders were practically his family. It was natural to put them first sometimes, wasn't it? And besides, it wasn't like he and Mary were in love. Sirius sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, MacDonald, I'll make it up to you, okay? She huffed. Oh, really? Yeah, I'll take you out for the day. First Hogsmeade weekend, all right? We can do anything you want to do. I'll even brave Madame Padfoot's for you. Mary rolled her eyes, but he could see from the way her shoulders began to droop that he was winning her over. I mean it, Mary. I'll make it up to you. You're amazing, and I'm an idiot, and I'll do better next time, okay? He caught her eye, earnest, hoping she could hear the sincerity in his voice. After a moment, she sighed. You're such a prick, Black. Why is it so bloody difficult to stay mad at you? He grinned. Does that mean I'm forgiven? It means your apology is under consideration. And when can I expect to receive a decision? Mary sniffed. 3 to 5 business days. Sirius stretched his leg out again, nudging her foot. Is there anything I could do to, accelerate the process? Mary rolled her eyes, but her lips quirked up before she could stop them. You are impossible, Black. Is that a no? She smirked at him from across the empty carriage. Well, I never said that. By the time they arrived at Hogwarts, slightly tousled and breathless, Sirius's apology had been moved from pending consideration to conditionally accepted, so long as he lived up to his promise to treat Mary to a day in Hogsmeade. They reunited with their friends for the feast, and Sirius was incredibly relieved at how normal it all felt, watching the nervous first years as they were sorted, listening to Dumbledore's vague speech about focusing on what connects rather than what divides, and chattering over dinner about their summers and their new timetables. Sirius was rather looking forward to his schedule. He had dropped 4 classes after Owls. They finished up their pudding. James stretched, groaning. I'm knackered, he said, slamming the table as he stood. Early night tonight, eh, Marlene? Practice first thing. Oh, no you don't, Potter. You're coming with me. Lily shot him a chastising look, and James's eyes widened in delight, as if he could think of nothing more blissful than being scolded by Lily Evans. She tutted. We've got to lead the first years to bed. Have you already forgotten your prefect? Oh, shit. Yeah, oops. Lily shook her head as she stood. We'll work on the language, too. Come on. She glanced at the rest of the group. Passwords, Lionheart. They thanked her and left the 2 prefects behind, Lily eyeing James's adoring smile sceptically. Once they reached the common room, Sirius made a beeline for the largest, comfiest couch, flopping down and sighing as he settled back against the pillows. Mary sat beside him, stretching her feet across his legs. On the carpet beside them, Peter talked Marlene into a game of chess, and Remus folded himself up into an armchair, book appearing in his hand as if he plucked it out from the air. Sirius sighed happily, revelling in the return to normalcy after their tumultuous summer. After a few minutes had gone by, though, he had had his fill of revelling in the peace and quiet, and was ready for a bit of excitement. When's our first party then, eh? Marlene responded from the floor, eyes still glued to her chessboard. No one knew how he did it, but if you looked away from Peter for even a second, he would have your king in check by the time you turned back. Our first match is in November. You can organise the victory party if you want black. That's ages away, Mary drawled, tapping her foot against Sirius's knee. Halloween? Close to your birthday. We can do it after the feast. Remus perked up at the mention of food, setting his book down. Wonder if there's time to go down to the kitchens. You can't possibly still be hungry, Sirius said, amused. You had 3 helpings of pudding. Yeah, you're probably right, Remus sighed, sinking back into the armchair. He twisted to the side, swinging his long legs over one arm and slouching back into the other as he opened his book again. Sirius's back ached just looking at him. After a moment, he turned back to Mary, who had begun a running commentary on Peter and Marlene's chess game, much to Peter's irritation. A few minutes later, she grew bored and switched over to discussing music with Sirius. They were in the middle of a debate about which ABBA song was the best. Mooney had dozed off in his chair. It was safe. When the portrait door burst open, and a very frazzled-looking Lily dragged James inside. "Stay still, Potter! I'm trying!" James appeared to be compulsively and vigorously dancing an Irish jig, which immediately sent the rest of his friends into hysterics. Mary leapt up to her feet, giggling, and hurried over to help. On the rug by the hearth, Marlene and Peter were boneless with laughter, chess game abandoned. Sirius chuckled, watching them, and then looked up when he noticed Mooney shifting. The commotion appeared to have woken him from his nap. He blinked and smiled groggily at the sound of his friend's laughter, eyes crinkling in the corners. His shoulders rolled as he straightened, shifting beneath the fabric of his jumper. His hair was flattened against his temple on one side, where he had his head pressed against the back of the chair. Sirius watched him stretch lazily, twisting his neck from one side to the other. And then Remus turned, and their eyes met, and he raised an eyebrow. Sirius realized he was staring, and looked away quickly, face heating. "What happened?" Mary asked, placing her hands on her hips. "Silly Pratt was showing off, per usual. His hex hit a suit of armour and backfired." Lily looked both amused and somewhat frantic as she chased James around, trying to corner him so that she could perform the counter-jinx. "Who were you trying to hex?" Sirius crossed his arms, moving to stand by Mary. "Bloody Mulciber," James scowled, which created a delightful contrast with his jaunty jumping footwork. "Petrificulus totalis," Sirius yawned as he cast the spell. James stiffened immediately, collapsing onto the ground like a plank of wood. "Black," Lily groaned. "What?" he said innocently. "He's only trying to help." Lily shot him an exasperated look, then began discussing which spell to break it first with Mary. Sirius grinned down at his friend's immobile face. "Why go to all the trouble? We can just levitate him upstairs like this." Wednesday, the 8th of September, 1976. "With your owls now behind you, and your newts over a year away, do not fall into the trap of believing this will be an easy year. Your 6th year lays the foundation for your advanced exams, and the work you will do will be pivotal in determining the opportunities available to you once you leave school." Sirius resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He'd had quite enough of all their professors' dire warnings, especially now that they were on the 5th iteration of the same speech. Currently it was Flitwick giving it, and although his squeaky voice added a new twist, it was still almost word for word the same thing that Binns and McGonagall and literally every other professor had already said. Sirius wished they'd all sit down and compare notes, so that they could consolidate and save everyone else the trouble. He was out of his seat the moment the class ended, shoving his things haphazardly into his bag and bidding farewell to James, who rushed off to a prefect meeting. He was attending them all religiously, though Sirius had a feeling it had more to do with a certain redhead than it did with any real sense of duty. He finished packing up and glanced over at Remus, expecting the other boy to be ready to leave, but he was staring out of the window, seemingly unaware of the students streaming out of the door behind him. "Mooney? Wakey, wakey." Sirius reached over and shook his shoulder, snapping him out of his daydream. "What?" Remus blinked, startled. "Lesson's over, Dopey. Where did you wander off to?" "Just distracted," he mumbled, sweeping his quills and parchment into the bag as he stood. Sirius eyed the familiar furrow between his brows, and leaned in as he asked, "Is it because of tonight? Are you nervous?" It was a full moon, their first since... Well, since everything that happened the previous term. Sirius was determined to ensure that everything went smoothly, to show his friend that he could still trust him. Remus shrugged, smiling slightly. No more than usual. Sirius studied his face a moment longer, but if Moony didn't want to talk about it, he wasn't going to push it. Instead, he changed tack, saying cheerfully, "We've got it free now. Do you want to go pop around the greenhouses?" "Nah," Remus smiled back at him. "It's okay. I actually, have to go to the owlery. Got a letter to post." "Oh, yeah? I'll come with you. James has another Ponzi Prefect meeting. I swear you never went to this many." "Nah, I sort of left it all up to Evans, to be honest." Remus smirked. Of course, I wasn't trying to impress her. Sirius grinned. Too bloody right. At least you know where your priorities are, Moony. Who's the letter for? Do you mind not asking? Remus glanced away as they entered the corridor, joining the stream of students flowing to and from lessons. Sirius had to walk a bit faster than normal to keep up with Moony's long stride. Miraculously, he had grown another inch over the summer. "Oh, yeah, of course, mate," Sirius said quickly. "Don't mind me, just bored, you know." He was just grateful that Moony was talking to him again, let alone spending time with him. Walking to the owlery together was already good enough to set his heart bouncing with joy in his chest. They made their way quickly up the halls, tramping single file up the narrow winding staircase. Aside from the heavy stink of bird shit, the owlery was one of the most beautiful places at Hogwarts, with a better view than even the astronomy tower. There were windows on all sides, allowing bright sunshine to stream through and catch on the stones. Sirius walked over to one of the open windows that faced out onto the forbidden forest, giving Remus space to select a bird and attach his letter to its leg. Once he was done, Remus walked over, joining Sirius at the windowsill. They stared out together, down on the dark trees. "How far do you reckon we got last year?" Sirius asked. "A couple of miles, at least." "At least," Remus agreed, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Do you think we could reach those mountains? There are caves, I bet." "I used to quite fancy living in a cave when I was little. Me and Reggie were going to run away from home and become cave dwellers." "Fucking weirdo." Remus shook his head, smiling. "It'd be freezing." "Yeah, we didn't really think about that stuff when you're 7, do you?" "I suppose." Remus's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I never actually thought about running away, to be honest. Lots of boys actually did it, but the police normally brought them back. Matron used to say that if one of us went missing, it was no skin off her nose. She still got paid at the end of the day." The sunlight picked out the freckles on his cheeks. Sirius felt like something had caught in his chest. "Moony, that's—" Remus laughed humorously and headed towards the staircase. "Come on, let's get out of here. I'm hungry." They had to pause their descent halfway down the spiral steps when they heard footsteps, flattening themselves against the wall to let whoever it was pass. Sirius waited, and after a moment a mousy blonde head appeared. It was that annoying little bugger from Remus's fan club, the one who had ruined his surprise party. Sirius felt a vengeful twist of satisfaction as he observed what appeared to be a nasty sunburn splattered across the boy's pale face. He froze when he caught sight of them. "Hi, Chris," Remus said politely. "Hi!" The younger boy's eyes skittered away. He was clearly uncomfortable. It was a marked change from the last time Sirius had seen them speak. He wondered what had happened. On Christopher's robes, a silver Prefect pin glinted in the sunlight. "Well done on getting Prefect," Remus said encouragingly, but Sirius could hear the strain in his tone. He wondered if it was because of the silver, or if it was because whatever had happened between the two of them. "Yeah, thanks," Christopher mumbled, smiling weakly as he walked past. His arm brushed Remus as he hurried by, and Sirius had to stop himself from jumping when Moony suddenly leaned forward, long fingers gripping his shoulder for support. Sirius swallowed. He could hear Remus's breathing on the back of his neck. He hesitated a moment, then slipped an arm around his friend, helping him keep his balance. "It's just the silver," Sirius reminded himself, as his treacherous heart started pounding. "Only the silver." Remus's fingers dug into his shoulder. They were very warm. After a few seconds, Remus opened his eyes. He seemed to realize how close they were standing and stepped away quickly, clearing his throat and adjusting his robes. Sorry, he said briskly. Took me by surprise. It's okay. Sirius smiled, turning away and beginning back down the stairs. Another reason to hate prefects, eh? Chapter 96. 6th year, October. Saturday the 9th of October, 1976. Ugh, Remus groaned, climbing unsteadily to his feet as his body finished fitting itself back together. That didn't seem too bad. James transformed back into a human, smiling encouragingly as Remus winced. Depends on what you mean by bad, their friend muttered, yanking on his trousers. James politely averted his eyes, and Sirius, still a dog, plucked Remus's shirt up from the floor and trotted over with it in his mouth. Cheers, Padfoot. Remus smiled down at him, and Sirius wagged his tail, panting. He flopped over onto the floor, hoping to coax Remus into a belly rub, but the tall boy just shook his head and rolled his eyes, grinning. Thank Merlin it's Saturday, James said through a yawn, settling down onto the beaten-up couch. A new addition, transfigured from one of James's shoes. It had taken quite a few tries to get it right, and once they did, the Marauders quickly discovered why there was so little furniture in the shack. The poor sofa already had deep claw marks and stuffing hanging out from one side. If Madame Pomfrey lets me off the hospital wing, I'll probably go straight up to bed anyway, Remus agreed, stifling a yawn of his own and reclining onto his cot. You're lucky, Peter said, shifting abruptly from rat to human in one of the corners. Supposed to be taking Desi to Hogsmeade at 11. Prongs, didn't you have to lead the third years down? Nah, James yawned again, groaning loudly. Now Evans knows about Remus's furry little problem. She's actually cutting me some slack. That 5th year kid with that sunburn is doing it instead. Evans doesn't know anything else, does she? Sirius asked, turning back into a human to speak. He threw himself down onto the sofa next to James. Lily finding out about Remus's lycanthropy was a new development. Apparently it had happened at the end of the previous term. Sirius wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it. It was a Marauder's thing, knowing the secret. But he certainly wasn't going to kick up a fuss, seeing as she'd found out from Snape, who'd found out from Sirius. James shook his head in response, settling back onto the sagging pillows and shutting his eyes. Oi! Sirius poked his shoulder. You've got to get back soon, don't sleep. You lot go, Remus said quietly, watching them. Get some rest. Thanks for coming and all that. Coming to Hogsmeade, Mooney? Sirius said hopefully, dragging James up off the couch. 3 broomsticks, yeah? Can't, Remus muttered. Didn't I tell you? I had my permission revoked, after the attacks. What? Sirius felt a flash of heated anger. They can't punish you for something some other bastard's done. It was completely unfair. Dumbledore had already confirmed that Mooney had nothing to do with the attacks. He would never hurt anyone. Shh, Remus hissed, frowning. It's not to punish me, it's for my safety. Now get lost, the lot of you. Sirius blinked, abashed. He hadn't even considered that Mooney might be in danger. Did this mean that Dumbledore thought that Remus could be a target? It was hard to imagine anything happening so close to Hogwarts. The war was meant to be something separate, somewhere far away. Sirius had already thought that surely, as long as they had Dumbledore around, nothing truly awful could happen. But he supposed that line of thinking had always been a bit naive. He made his way back to Gryffindor Tower with James and Peter, shuffling under the invisibility cloak. By the time they finished climbing the seemingly endless stairs, the 3 boys were utterly knackered. They collapsed onto their beds, breathless. Reckon we can get a few hours kipping before Hogsmeade, yeah? James mumbled, burying his face in his pillow. Sirius nodded in agreement. Peter was already asleep. When he next woke, it was to the sound of Peter fumbling frantically in his trunk, muttering to himself. Bollocks, where is it? Could have sworn I stuck it in here. Keep it down, Pete, Sirius groaned, rolling over. Aren't you lot getting up for Hogsmeade? Sirius groaned again, mumbling, no, into his pillow. Peter continued to dig noisily through his trunk. From behind the drawn curtains of his bed, James snored loudly, seeming as if he'd be skipping the Hogsmeade excursion too. And if Remus wasn't even going, then Sirius figured there wasn't really any point in even getting up anyway. It wasn't as if Pete would want company. He'd be with Desdemona the whole time. Pete must have found whatever he was looking for, because the lid of his trunk slammed shut. James snorted from his bed, and Sirius thought for a moment he'd wake up, but then the snoring resumed. Oi! Pete, hang on! Sirius sat up, rustling around in the pocket of his cloak. Peter paused by the door, looking a bit irritated. What? I don't want to be late. Oh, calm your tits. I'm sure Desi can wait. Come here, take this. He shoved a few galleons into Peter's hand. "For the Halloween fire whiskey. Just slip it to Rosmerta. She'll know what we want." Peter huffed, but pocketed the money, hurrying out of the door with a quick farewell. Sirius fell back onto his bed, curling up under the blanket. It was so warm. Bloody hell! Sirius was pulled once more from sleep's grasp, this time by the loud slam of the door, and James's accompanying explanation. "Oh, sorry," Remus apologised. "Thought you'd be in Hogsmeade." "We were going to," Sirius yawned and stretched, rolling over, "but our beds looked so comfortable." "Damn, I didn't mean to sleep that long." James rolled his shoulders, standing. "I was going to slip Rosmerta a bit of cash for the Halloween fire whiskey, too." "Don't worry, I got Pete to do it." Sirius folded his hands behind his head, resisting the urge to close his eyes and drift off again. "Is it lunchtime?" "Yeah," Remus smiled, looking quite pleased to have company. "Should we go down?" "Let me shower first," James said, slouching over to the bathroom. "Ugh, and I really ought to start that Defense Against the Dark Arts essay on Patronuses. Have either of you done it?" Sirius didn't even bother responding. He knew the question hadn't really been for him. "Drafted," Remus said absent-mindedly, beginning to flip through his own stack of homework. "You can take a look at it if you want, but I bet you know it better than me anyway." "Hardly had time for the reading," James shouted from inside the bathroom, shirt off and toothbrush in his mouth. He never shut the door, desensitised from years in the Quidditch locker room. "With the game coming up and these Prefect patrols, not that I'm complaining about those. Patronuses look really cool, though. I wanted to be the first one to do it." Sirius rolled his eyes fondly, smiling. Normally he tried to give James a run for his money in Defence Against the Dark Arts, but when it came to Patronuses, there was no denying that Potter was the best suited to the task. The power of the spell was tied directly to emotions, more specifically, positive emotions. When it came to sheer, stubborn optimism, James had everyone beat, and Sirius didn't think he'd be surprised if Potter managed the spell on his first try. Of course, Sirius was sure that he'd pick it up easily too, but he couldn't conjure happy memories at a split second the way that James could. "So we've got the booze sorted," he said, speaking up so that James could hear him over the running shower. "Food's easy, and it'll be right after the feast anyway, so no one will be hungry except Mooney." "Up yours," Remus said calmly as he reclined onto his bed, leaning against the headboard. "Decorations," Sirius grinned. "Well, I've asked Davini and Hufflepuff to do something creative with pumpkins, so we'll see how that goes. And then we'll need music. You'll do that again, won't you, Mooney?" Sirius shrugged. "I could, but last time everyone just wanted to put on whatever they wanted anyway." He still seemed distracted, frowning down at the notes he'd taken on Patronuses. "That's fine," Sirius reassured him. "Just get them going for the first few tracks. Something they can dance to, this time." Now Remus looked up, smirking sarcastically. "You can dance to Pink Floyd if you try hard enough." Sirius's throat felt dry. He swallowed. "I know you have standards, but Mary asked if we could stick to ABBA, maybe." He would die before he admitted to Remus the absolute sickening amount of time he had spent listening to SOS that summer. Oh, Jesus. Remus threw himself dramatically back onto the mattress, flinging an arm over his face. "Spare me." Sirius laughed, trying not to stare at the silver skin along the waistband of his jumper. "Shit! Mary!" James shouted suddenly. Sirius frowned. "What?" he yelled back. James bolted out of the bathroom, towel wrapped hastily around his waist, soaked through and dripping all over the floorboards. "Mary!" he repeated earnestly. "You were supposed to treat her to the day out in Hogsmeade, to make up for her birthday." "Oh, buggering fuck!" Sirius smacked himself in the forehead, groaning. "How do I keep forgetting?" "Not your fault, mate," James said soothingly, grabbing another towel and turning his hair into an absolute bird's nest as he dried it. "You've been busy." Sirius doubted that any excuse would mollify Mary. She knew better than anyone how little of his time was spent on homework, and now he didn't even have Quidditch as an excuse for why he'd been so preoccupied. It was just bad luck that Hogsmeade had fallen on the day after the full moon. Sirius had been so anxious to make sure the night went well that it was practically all he'd been thinking about for the past week. Well, she'll forgive me." He ran a hand through his hair, tugging the tangled strands. "I'll take her out next time, and really go mad on Valentine's Day." "That's a month away," Remus pointed out. Sirius shrugged. It wasn't as if there was a closer holiday he could take advantage of. They were doing a party for Halloween, and he'd been at the Potters for Christmas. James shoved his glasses onto his nose, still clad in nothing but a towel, as he rifled through his dresser for clothes. "Your funeral, mate," he shook his head. "You're going to lose that girl if you're not careful." Thursday, the 21st of October, 1976. It wasn't as if he was trying to be a bad boyfriend. He did care about Mary, and he didn't enjoy making her angry, but there was just other things he cared about more, sometimes. Besides, he thought that it was bloody ridiculous, expecting someone to become the centre of your universe just because you were dating. He wasn't like Peter. He didn't spend every waking minute thinking about his girlfriend. He hadn't thought he'd be expected to. But clearly, Mary had different ideas. She kept bringing up the fact that their anniversary was coming up, making snide remarks along with the lines of, "You'd think after a year you'd start taking things more seriously." She did not appreciate his response. "But Mary, I'm always taking things seriously." This led to quite a few arguments in which Mary insisted that he didn't care about her, and Sirius insisted that he did, which led Mary to demand that he prove it, which led Sirius to demand that she explain why she suddenly needed him to prove himself every 10 seconds. "Bloody hell, MacDonald, we're dating, aren't we? Why would I have asked you to be my girlfriend if I didn't care about you?" "I don't know, Black. That's what I'm trying to figure out." Sirius began to feel as if they were running in circles, rehashing the same fight over and over again as the weeks slipped by. But he wasn't sure how to fix it. He would always try to make it up to Mary, showering her with affection, to apologise for his offending her, but it was never sustainable. He would eventually find his interest tugged away, becoming more preoccupied with his friends or research for his latest prank. Inevitably, he would forget to walk her to class, or snap at her when he was having a bad morning, or make a joke that had her bristling like a cat. And the cycle would start all over again. At least the make-up sex was bloody good fun. In fact, one Thursday near the end of the month, Sirius skived off arithmancy, specifically to spend a bit of quality time making up for his latest slight. James and Remus were in class, Peter was off doing something with the chess club, and Mary had a free, which meant it was the perfect opportunity to sneak up to the boys' dorm room and cast a locking charm on the door. Sirius had a Bowie record in the background, and his brain just began to go fuzzy with heat when he felt Mary's hands on his hips, tugging on his trousers. He froze. "What are you doing?" "Taking your trousers off, obviously." "Why?" Mary grinned wickedly. "Do you really want me to explain it to you, Black?" She leaned forward, lips brushing against the juncture of his collarbone and shoulder, hands sliding down his thighs, and it felt amazing. But it was still light out. Sunshine bright through the windows, and his legs, she'd see— "Stop!" Sirius yelped, pushing her away. He was breathing hard, heat tangled with cold panic in his gut. Mary stared at him, shocked. "What?" His heart pounded, fists inside his chest, tongue knotted with anxiety. Sirius thought of the sharp, ugly lines marring the backs of his legs, the way she'd look at him when she saw them, disgust and pity and horror, and she'd ask what had happened, and he'd have to say something to explain, and I don't want to do that. Now Mary looked hurt, confused, embarrassed. "And what exactly did you think I was going to do?" she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. Sirius backtracked. "Nothing. I should probably keep my trousers on, in case one of the lads comes back." Mary frowned. "You said they've got arithmancy for the next hour." "Yeah, but Pete doesn't. Wouldn't want him walking in on anything. I'm pretty sure he and Desi have only made it to second base." Mary studied, leaning back on her heels. After a moment, she said slowly, "You know, Sirius, we don't have to do anything if you don't want." Something about the way she was looking at him, eyes piercing like arrows through his chest, made him feel dizzy. He sucked in a shallow breath. No, I want to. Just come here." He reached out, snagging her waist, tugging her forwards. She hesitated, but eventually relented, falling back into his arms. Chapter 98. 6th Year, Halloween. Sunday, the 31st of October, 1976. In hindsight, he probably should have seen it coming. They'd been running in circles for nearly 2 months, driving all their friends mad with their constant bickering, and never seemed to get any closer to reaching a stalemate. Looking back, Sirius supposed that it had always been sort of inevitable, the sharp decline of something that was never meant to last. But at the time, as October gave her last dying gasps and Halloween drew steadily closer, Sirius was too preoccupied to spend much time reflecting on the state of his relationship. Halloween of 1976 just so happened to fall on a Sunday, and considering the importance of the holiday to the student body, Dumbledore had wisely elected to cancel classes the following Monday. This, of course, meant the perfect opportunity for a party the likes of which the castle had never seen, and Sirius was determined to throw it. The problem with being a genius event planner, a connoisseur of celebration, a supervisor of spectacular stories, was that every party with the Marauders' names attached to it simply had to outdo the last. With the new heights reached after Mooney's legendary birthday bash the previous term, Sirius was entirely absorbed in ensuring that the Gryffindor's Halloween party would be even more memorable. Fortunately, he had James to help him. Being a prefect had done sod all to staunch Potter's Halloween spirit. In fact, if anything, he seemed to be even more daring now that he had the authority of a shiny badge to fall back on. Together, the two of them amassed a hidden collection of Flibberbuster's fireworks, which they planned to set off at midnight, along with copious amounts of alcohol. For the older students, of course. The prefects would be packing the first and second years off to bed at a reasonable hour, per Lily's regulations, and she also warned James that if she saw any sloshed 13-year-olds, she would hold him personally responsible. So although things remained quite tense with Mary, and although they continued to spend the majority of their time either fighting or making up, Sirius was too busy to worry about it much. He felt guilty for letting her down when he'd promised to do better, but he also couldn't help feeling a bit resentful. Mary seemed to want some sort of nebulous commitment that she only ever defined as acting like you care about me. And no matter how Sirius reiterated that he already did care about her, it never seemed to be enough. Sometimes he felt as though they were speaking two entirely different languages, words sliding past each other and never really sticking. Still, Mary always forgave him, and he always forgave her. He figured that maybe this was just the way things were in relationships. After all, it wasn't like he had anything to compare to. He still liked Mary, and she clearly still liked him, so Sirius didn't see why, eventually, the problem wouldn't just blow itself out. So on the afternoon of the party, when Mary asked if he felt like a walk, Sirius didn't think anything of it. All the preparations had been finished, the alcohol was safely stashed, Avon's pumpkins were in place, and he and James had spent the morning double-checking the time delay spell on the fireworks to make sure that they'd all go off at the right time. With nothing else to do, Sirius agreed, looping his fingers through Mary's and following her lead. He was mildly surprised when she led him down to the grounds. It was a bit chilly out for a stroll around the lake, or a rendezvous under the Quidditch stands. And besides, Potter was trying out the new beaters. Sirius doubted he'd be able to focus on properly snogging if he had to listen to James shouting drill instructions in the background. But he didn't complain, allowing Mary to guide him down to the edge of the lake. She paused as he reached to skim a stone, fingers still intertwined. The stone bounced 3 times, then sank. Mary said, "I think we ought to break up." Sirius jerked around to stare at her, blinking. "What?" "Me and you," she said, as though that were the confusing part. "I think we should break up." "But why?" Mary smiled up at him, a little sadly. "Come on, Sirius." Her voice was quiet. "Are you actually surprised?" I mean, I know we've been fighting, but it's more than that." She untangled their fingers, wrapping her cloak more tightly around her shoulders. "I think when we started dating, I had this sort of idea in my head. I thought that if I could be the girlfriend that you wanted, then eventually you'd just, I don't know, magically become the boyfriend I wanted. And we'd sort of balance out and everything would click. But I don't think it works like that anymore. I thought that if I just changed enough, then you would automatically change too. But you didn't. And now I keep getting mad at you for it, and it's not fair on either of us." What's that supposed to mean? Change how?" Mary shook her head. "I don't know, Sirius. I don't really know how to describe it. It's just like Sometimes it's like your feelings are so big that there isn't room for anyone else's. And I don't think you mean for it to be like that, but, well, I don't know. They were quiet for a bit then. Are you mad at me? Mary laughed. No, you big oaf. I'm tired of getting mad at you. I think things would be better if we were just friends. So, Sirius swallowed. You want to stay friends, then? She smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Of course I do, Sirius. I still care about you. I think we just want different things. He huffed a laugh, staring down at the dying grass beneath his feet. Oh, really? Really? She nudged his shoulder with hers, smirking. I want a boyfriend who doesn't forget my birthday. And you want... She trailed off, hesitating. After a moment, she leaned her head against his shoulder and sighed. Well, to be honest, I'm not sure what you want, but I don't think it's me. Eventually, Mary went back inside to get ready for the party. Sirius waved her away, insisting that he was all right, and stayed at the lake, skipping stones and watching the ripples they made on the surface of placid water. He supposed that he ought to be sad. It was meant to be a big deal ending a relationship, especially one that had lasted for nearly a year. He should probably be moping, or angry, or frantically scrambling to gather the shattered pieces of his heart. Instead, he felt oddly calm. It was a strange sort of relief, knowing for sure where he stood with Mary. He would miss some parts of the relationship, he was sure, the inside jokes, the easy comfort of being wrapped in her arms, the sense of intimacy that came with knowing there were experiences they shared only with each other. But if Sirius was being honest with himself, there were also quite a few things that he wouldn't miss. First and foremost, the constant pressure that came with feeling as though there was some sort of standard for being a good boyfriend that he simply was incapable of grasping. At the end of the day, he'd never really understood how dating Mary was supposed to differentiate so greatly from being friends, aside from the snogging, and later the shagging. If they were still able to spend time together, still able to laugh and talk comfortably with each other, well, that had always been the best part. Sirius began to trudge back towards the castle, thinking about what Mary had said. He agreed that they would probably be better off as friends, when he stopped to consider just how frequent their arguments had become over the past few weeks. It bothered him a bit, thinking that the way he had acted may have hurt Mary's feelings. He certainly didn't want to keep her in a relationship if she felt like he wasn't meeting her needs, whatever those were. Overall, he supposed it was the mature thing, breaking up. No use being sad about it if it had to happen. Sirius climbed up the stairs to the Gryffindor Tower, considering Mary's final comment, how she'd said they wanted different things. He had no doubt that she was right. Wanting different things, essentially, was the root of most of their fights. He thought of her voice as she'd said, "I'm not sure what you want," the unhappy line of her smile, the resigned look in her eye. He couldn't blame her for the confusion. He knew he hadn't made things easy. The problem was that Sirius wasn't sure what he wanted either. At face value, Mary was the perfect girlfriend, funny and beautiful and kind. Almost any bloke in the castle would have considered himself the luckiest man alive to date her. And she'd been an excellent girlfriend, caring and attentive, and more patient than he had any right to, even when she was losing her temper. If he was being honest with himself, he didn't think he had ever truly deserved her. Even though he'd enjoyed dating her quite a lot, it had been good fun being Mary's boyfriend, at least when she wasn't trying to bite his head off or acting like a prat. And yet, Sirius sighed as he entered the dorm room, feeling even more confused now that he'd tried to untangle his feelings, rather than just ignoring them. As the door shut behind him, the familiar twanging guitar of Diamond Dogs filled the air.
The scavenger, the season of the bitch. Sashay on the boardwalk, scurry to the ditch. Just another future song, lonely little kids.
The curtains were drawn around Remus's bed, and when Sirius poked his head behind them, Mooney was reclining, record player spinning near his feet. "Oh, hello." "Hi." Remus sat up, shifting self-consciously. "Do you want your record player back?" "Nah." Sirius shrugged his way past the curtains, crawling onto the bed to settle down next to Remus. It wasn't as if he had anything else to do. The party was still a little while off. And besides, It had been a long time since he and Mooney had listened to a record together. They lay side by side in silence, listening to the jangling piano and brassy horns that accompanied Bowie's scratchy vocals. Sirius tried to relax, but his mind was still buzzing, thoughts circling Mary's words like vultures around a corpse. Eventually, he opened his mouth. Broke up with Mary. It felt strange to say it out loud. Final. Really? Sorry about that, mate. Sirius shrugged casually. Nah, it's okay. Not like I was in love with her or anything. Plenty more fish in the sea and all that. Yeah, his laugh was slightly strained, and they both fell silent again. The dizzy, barking music of the first song ended, replaced by the dark swell of Sweet Thing. Love this track, Sirius said quietly, as Bowie crooned between them. Remus murmured in agreement. The music was doing strange things to him, loosening the muscles in his jaw, stirring the blood in his veins. We did it, he blurted. Me and Mary. Remus frowned. You did... Oh, when? Over the summer. Once or twice since we've been back at Hogwarts. Right. Is that... that's not why she dumped you. No, Sirius scoffed, offended. Thanks for the vote of confidence, but I don't think I was that terrible. We just broke up, that's all. How, was it? The breakup? No, how was it? Sirius felt a shiver of smug satisfaction. Mooney was so knowledgeable that he forgot, sometimes, how inexperienced he was. Oh, yeah, it was good. Great. Not like I imagined, but yeah, good. Well, good then. It felt like he was meant to say something else. She's really gorgeous, Mary. Yeah, she is. Remember when we were kids, and we were convinced that Bowie was a wizard? Sirius grinned, shifting slightly to look at Mooney's face. He was smiling. Yeah, I think I still sort of believe he is. One day, when we all live in London, we'll go find him, and then we can ask. Remus burst out laughing. What? Sirius tried to sound indignant, but he was smiling so hard his cheeks ached. You can't just meet someone like Bowie. I don't see why not. We could go to one of his gigs, or find out where he lives. Have some imagination, Lupin. Once we're of age, we can do anything. Rebel started up, abrasive guitar and kicking drums. Sirius felt as if his heart was pounding in time to the beat. Anything, Remus smirked, and Sirius tried to ignore the way it made his stomach flip. You already think you can do anything. Calling me arrogant, he sat up, attempting to sound affronted, even as he smiled. Remus smiled back. Gonna deny it? He had that mischievous glint in his eye, the one that made his entire face light up. Your ego is so big it has its own orbit. Hush! Your ego is so big, Remus continued, eyes bright. When you're doing it with Mary, you probably closed your eyes and imagined yourself. You wound me, Lupin! Sirius protested, snatching a pillow and beginning to beat him with it. Remus kicked at him, kneeing him in the shin as he tried to roll out of the way. But Sirius's vengeance would not be thwarted. He scrambled up on top of Remus, breathless with laughter, and pinned his wrists over his head. Ha! He shouted, victorious. Apologize. No. Remus narrowed his eyes, laughing as he tried to yank his arms free. Sirius straddled him, using his body weight to keep Remus in place, shoving him back down. You can't escape, Sirius cried. I've got you now, Mooney. His heart was pounding, blood surging through his veins. And then their eyes met, and there was something dark behind Remus's gaze, something familiar and hungry. Sirius could feel him. Hot skin and sharp hip bones, pressed flush together. There was nothing soft about him, nothing soft at all, except the skin on his wrists, where his pulse fluttered like a trapped bird under Sirius's fingertips. Remus's hips jerked upwards deliberately, eyes searching, searing, and Sirius wanted. He wanted. "Sirius," Remus whispered, voice scratching on its way out. "What are we doing?" But Sirius was already gone. "Shh," he begged, not trusting himself to speak. "Shh." He fell forward, unable to bear the weight of Mooney's eyes, releasing his wrists, burying his face into the pillow beside his head. Just, he rolled his hips without meaning to, as the opening refrain of Rock and Roll With Me began to play. "Okay," Remus whispered, breath like a flame against Sirius's neck, which was good, because Sirius wasn't sure he could stop if he wanted to, and he didn't want to. He wanted this. He wanted Remus's voice in his ear, the small, caught sounds in the back of his throat, the uncontrolled snap of his hips. He wanted the ache and release of pressure, the friction between their bodies, the heated press of skin. He wanted more. And then Mooney's hands were there, like magic, like he could sense every dark and hungry thought, tugging at the buttons on their jeans. Sirius tensed as he felt Remus's hands on his skin, but he wanted it, wanted the long fingers, the callous scars. Remus was hot and rough and demanding, and yet somehow excruciatingly gentle, as if Sirius was something that might break, and it didn't make any difference, because he was shattering all the same. "I want this," he thought, unable to do anything but succumb to the force of his own piercing desire. "I want this. I want more. I want him." It had never felt like this, with Mary. Sirius hadn't realized it could feel like this. Beneath him, Remus twitched, gasping, tremoring, and that was all it took. Sirius couldn't stop the moan that tore its way out of his throat, muffled against the bedsheets. Remus's fingers were still wrapped around him. For a few moments, there was nothing but the sound of their shallow breathing and thundering heartbeats. Then cold dread sank like a stone into the pit of Sirius's stomach, chasing away any lingering heat, and he untangled himself, freeing Remus from the cage of his limbs. The silence was an agitated animal between them, pacing and predatory, as they did up their trousers and straightened their clothes. Sirius cleared his throat. Got a bit carried away. Remus was staring at him, eyes flickering over his face. "Right." He sounded skeptical, and Sirius thought of what he'd just done, climbing on top of him, pinning him down and grinding into his hand like some sort of animal, fucking moaning. "Sorry." "What? No, that's okay." It wasn't okay. It very, very much was not okay, and Sirius wasn't sure how Mooney was trying to make him feel better when he should have been furious. "I'm going to have a shower. Not long until the feast." He wasn't sure how many more seconds he could bear the weight of his friend's searching gaze before he fell apart completely. "Right." Remus nodded, still watching as Sirius climbed awkwardly back into the curtains. He hesitated, turning back once, hating himself as he asked, "You won't tell anyone?" Remus snorted, like he had said something ridiculous. "As if I would." Sirius nodded, guilt and gratitude mixing stickily in his stomach. He locked himself in the bathroom before he could throw up.